and share my screen. Great. All right. So I'm gonna put this down for just a minute. So hello and welcome to our Come Follow Me study group today. My name is John Clark, and I'll be leading the discussion today. And I'll be leading the lesson today. I hope if you have questions that you'll ask, and just feel free to, stop. It's not a tragedy. You know what I mean? Like, John, hold on. And I will try and stop and at certain times and sort of say, is there any way I can clarify anything? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with my desktop that has the kind of slides for today. So you should be seeing on your screen the slide that says, welcome to Come Follow Me study. Is that right? We good?
Yes.
Great. All right. Great. Steve, you can just put your thumb up. That's good. I can see you, so it's great. All right. So we start today reading Isaiah 50 through 57. So up till now, we have kind of bounced around the chapters in Isaiah. But these next 2 weeks, we started in chapter 50 and go to 57. And then the week of conference, we go to 58 through 66. So we just go straight through. There's no bouncing around. Okay. So this then, after 2 weeks, will end our study of Isaiah. Okay. It's a long one. We spend a lot of time there. We do in seminary, we do in Sunday school, we do in all the auxiliaries. So just reviewing the purpose is background and context, ideas for, studying together, come follow me. And then if you have any questions from the reading, or you want to request a copy of the PDF for whatever reason, you feel as though it might help you in your life, my email address is here, je5clark@yahoo.com. The 5 is because I was born in May. Easy to remember. I was born on, actually, here's an easy thing to remember. My birthday is Priesthood Commemoration Day, May 15th, Aaronic Priesthood Commemoration Day. Okay, so we'll just start off with a little bit of a review of who is the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah's name means the Lord is salvation. We read in the scriptures, he's the son of Amos, and he was a prophet in Jerusalem for about 40 years, from about 740 to 701 BC. He had great religious and political influence during the reign of King Hezekiah. He was King Hezekiah's chief advisor, in addition to being a prophet. You will see that the prophet Isaiah's prophecies and Jeremiah and Daniel even overlap a little bit in time. Remember that an Old Testament prophet is simply someone who is chosen and moved upon by the Lord to prophesy. He is not they are rarely, if ever, the only one I can think of in the Old Testament is Samuel. They are rarely, if ever, involved in the formal religious structure of the day. They're typically not the high priests of the Aaronic priesthood. You know what I mean? They're just not. So we are used to today calling the president of the church the prophet. And so we think that it's easy for us to think that by virtue of their being a prophet, they have some sort of a responsibility in the organization of the church or a religion, and they did not typically in Old Testament times. Very few did. Samuel, honestly, is the only one I can think of. Isaiah is the most quoted of all the prophets in the scriptures, being frequently quoted by Jesus, Paul, Peter, and John, especially in the Revelation of John, the book of Revelations. So all those are the major authors of the New Testament, okay? Likewise, in the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants, they quote from Isaiah more than any other prophet. Second Nephi, you get into him quoting Isaiah. You know what I mean? There's a lot of quotes. And then the Doctrine and Covenants quotes from Isaiah quite frequently. And part of the reason is because the themes of Isaiah are scattering and gathering. And that's one of the reasons that I think that Nephi, the prophet, really loved Isaiah. Number one, he was alive. Isaiah was alive in Nephi's day, right? And the other thing is, when Nephi gets to the promised land and he sees the vision of his people being kind of destroyed by the descendants of his brothers, I think he has a lot of comfort in understanding that, yes, people are scattered, but the descendants of Lehi will again be gathered back again as part of the remnant, and they will be able to claim their blessing as children of Israel, of Jacob. Okay. So some other stuff about Isaiah. Isaiah 1:1 tells us that Isaiah prophesied during the reigns of the following kings of Judah: Uzziah, or sometimes called Azariah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah is the one that we know most about. There's actually some narrative portions in the book of Isaiah, story portions, they aren't just prophecies or poetry, that talk about Hezekiah and his faithfulness, that he goes mad for a while and eats grass and is crazy, but the Lord restores him. Okay. Uzziah reigned for 52 years in the middle of the 8th century BC. So Isaiah must have begun his ministries a few years before Uzziah's death, probably in the 1740s. He may also have been a contemporary for some years of Manasseh, who was the king after Hezekiah. Thus, Isaiah may have prophesied for as long as 64 years. He may have been around. I mean, so his book is long because he prophesied for a long time, okay? So this is just a little bit of from Come Follow Me lesson manual, either online or if you have a hard copy, this is in your hard copy. So here we are, here's King Hezekiah, and you'll see Isaiah, Micah, Joel. These are all kind of prophesying at the same time. So Isaiah starts here, but Isaiah is still prophesying during the reign of Zedekiah, because he's still prophesying when Sarah, Lehi, and Sariah leave, when the Lehites leave, okay? And Ezekiel and Daniel are prophesying at the same time. So Ezekiel ends up, we'll find out, he ends up staying in Israel. So does Isaiah for a while. But Ezekiel ends up staying, but is eventually carried off into Egypt. Daniel prophesies from Babylon, okay? He goes with, and he's in Babylon at the time having prophesying, okay? So these three, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, these four, are kind of at various places on the map prophesying at essentially the same time, okay? So, and just as a reminder, Isaiah is prophesying in the land of, in the kingdom of Judah, which is the southern kingdom, okay? This northern kingdom, he prophesies, is going to be carried away. Sorry, I'm just making these things all go crazy. He prophesies about that, and also prophesies about the coming destruction that's coming from that's coming with the Lehites leaving. Okay, so for just a second, I want to keep this up, but I'm going to go to going to bring up. No, that's not what I want to bring. I'm going to bring up the internet. Okay, I just want to show you where on the church website you can find some of this history. There's a chronology of the Old Testament that's actually useful. So I'll show you how you get there. I'll go backwards for a minute. Okay, so if you go, starting with the libraries, and go to the scriptures, okay, and go to study helps, you will see here is a Bible chronology. So click on it, okay? And we can start with the chronology of the Old Testament, because that's where we are. And it starts sort of, you know, with the old-fashioned notation of 4000 BC, okay? Assuming a 6,000-year history, which is not necessarily always the case. But soon you'll get to the death of Solomon, the 10 tribes revolt, and then the following table, the first column follows the books of Kings and Chronicles, and the third contains a revised chronology derived from the Assyrian and other external things, okay? So in this, the kings of Judah and Israel, the kings of Judah are in heavy type: Rehoboam, Abinadab, Asa. Those are all kings of the southern kingdom. And then these that are in all caps are the ones in the northern kingdom. And you'll see that after a while, they go away because they're carried into
Babylon.
The 10 tribes are carried into Assyria in 740 BC. Okay, so then you see 721, end of the northern kingdom. So going forward, then you just have the southern kingdom kings until they're carried off into Babylon here. Okay, so Isaiah spans kind of both of those. He begins to prophesy in 740, and then just a few years later, like essentially 20 years later, they're carried captive into Babylon. And he also then sees and prophesies about, carried captive into Assyria, and then he sees the southern kingdom carried into Babylon, okay? So his prophecies, especially in the early parts, are about the northern kingdom being captured by the Assyrians, okay? So anyway, this is a place where you can see, it's just interesting. This last column is stuff that is kind of going on that we know of from just history. The first Olympiad here is here, you know what I mean? So, and then this middle one is kind of trying to coordinate what we know from history, internal and external things, external histories. But this will give you kind of a history of that stuff, okay? This is the Persian Empire under King Cyrus, and King Cyrus we read about in Isaiah. He's compared to the Messiah because King Cyrus allows the people to return, so he's a restorer, and he allows the people to rebuild the second temple, okay? So this is just a little place, this chronology is a little place that you can go to figure out who the kings are and whether they're northern and southern kingdoms. It just kind of gives you a little bit of a history, okay?
Yes.
So sometimes it can be useful. It's more, it's a little more in depth than just this very, very simple chronology, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we know about Isaiah. We know internally that Isaiah has a wife and he has 2 sons. In Isaiah 3:7, we learn about the oldest son, 7:3, excuse me. Then the Lord said unto Isaiah, go forth now to meet Ahaz, who is the king, thou and Shear-Jashub. And that name means a remnant shall return, thy son. So he names his oldest son about a restoration, a remnant shall return. Then in the next chapter, it's not chronological, but we read that Isaiah says, I went unto the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then said the Lord unto me, call his name Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz, which means quickly to spoils or plunder speedily, which is a little bit indicative of scattering, okay? So he has an older son named Gathering and a younger son named Scattering, whose name kind of gives the meaning of scattering. And his wife is called a prophetess. According to some interpretations, Isaiah's wife was called the prophetess, either because she was endowed with the prophetic gift like Deborah, who we read about in Judges 4 and 5, or Huldah, who we read about in 2 Kings 22 or 2 Chronicles 34, who literally had a prophetic calling and prophesied. Or it could be that she was just the wife of the prophet, so she was called a prophetess. Okay.
Can I call you back
So
in 1 hour?
let's look then at a simple overview of what's going on in the book of Isaiah. This divides, we'll look back 1 through 33 and then 33 on. So this is a little bit of a review. The book opens in chapter 1 kind of by setting out the themes of judgment and scattering and the subsequent restoration for the righteous. This is really a recurring theme in Isaiah, and it applies to, the scattering applies to the northern kingdoms being dispersed, then later with the Lehites, the southern kingdom being dispersed, the kingdom of Judah, and again has another recurring kind of theme in the scattering of Israel after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And so there's latter day scattering and gathering, okay? So some of these things are very specific and given in a specific time in Isaiah's day, but they have relevance to our day as well, okay? So 1 through 5, God has a plan which will be fulfilled during the day of the Lord, when Jerusalem will become the center of his worldwide rule. On that day, all the nations of the world will come to Zion for instruction, but first the city must be punished and cleansed of evil. Israel is invited to join in this plan, okay? Chapters 5 through 12 explain the significance of the Assyrian judgment against Israel, okay? The Assyrians are able to come in and conquer Israel and move them from their promised land because the people were unrighteous, okay? But there's promised a rule by the Davidic king will follow after the Assyrian monarch is brought down. So here's the deal. All of the kings of the southern kingdom, even after Zedekiah and the people are returned, sometimes the second temple is called the Temple of Zerubbabel, because Zerubbabel was the name of the ruler at the time. Even he is a descendant of David. And of course, one of the promises to David is that the Messiah, who is also a descendant of David, Jesus Christ, is a Davidic king. He's the ultimate Davidic king, okay? So David was a type of that, others are a type, but the promise was made by the Lord to David that his kingdom on earth would continue, and it does, right? Chapters 13 through 27 announce the preparation of the nations for the Lord's worldwide rule. And 28 through 30 announce that a royal savior, a Messiah, will emerge in the aftermath of Jerusalem's punishment and the destruction of her oppressors. So this is a recurring pattern. We think of the Messiah as Jesus Christ, which is the ultimate fulfillment of this pattern. But there are other messiahs, saviors along the way, little m messiahs, who emerge as the people gather after their destruction, the destruction of the oppressor. Okay, now 34 through 66. The oppressor is now in these chapters identified as Babylon rather than Assyria, because I think Assyria has already captured the northern kingdom and Babylon is the biggest threat, okay? And the Assyrians actually fall to the Babylonians in a day. Once the Assyrians conquer, Babylon is able to conquer them in a day, okay? So it isn't, so the empires just keep getting bigger and bigger. You'll see in a map. So 34 and 34:5 tell how the Lord will return the redeemed exiles to Jerusalem. And those are the people who were scattered during when the Lehites leave, okay? There's a prophecy that they'll be away for 70 years, but they'll return, okay? And they eventually do. We'll see that in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, we've already seen that when we studied those historical chapters. Okay. 36 through 39 are kind of narrative, and they talk about Hezekiah, but they show the faithfulness of King Hezekiah to the Lord during the Assyrian siege and as a model for the restored community. Okay, while others are sort of making alliances, Hezekiah remains faithful to the Lord, that the Lord will deliver them. Okay. 40 through 54 show the pattern of the restoration of Zion. Persian king Cyrus the Great is then referred to as a type of the promised Messiah because he restores the people to the land and then allows them to rebuild the temple, which was destroyed. Okay. Chapters 55 through 66 are an exhortation, an admonition to Israel to keep the covenant that God's eternal promise to David in the Messiah is now made to the people of Israel and Judah at large. And the book ends by encouraging righteousness as the final stages of God's plan come to pass, including the pilgrimage of the nations to Zion and the realization of the Lord's kingship, which we would call the millennial reign. Christ reigns as king on the earth. Okay, those are what is in chapters 34 through 66. So if you get bogged down in a lot of stuff, it's sometimes good to take a step back and say, okay, if you're bogged down in the middle of 40, in the middle of 40 to 54, okay, the main themes of this are this. So look for restoration, look for King Cyrus, that Cyrus then is a type of the Messiah and the second coming. Part of the things that makes it difficult, it makes it good, because it has lots of application to various cycles, but it makes it difficult because it's given in a cycle that we don't have a good understanding of. Okay, so that's just the basic overview. This I wanted to show you. So this is the Assyrian kingdom, and then it gets bigger, this green part, and then it gets bigger, okay, and includes Egypt and these parts. And then if you'll, I don't have a map of it here, but if you look to the Babylonian kingdom, it's even bigger and goes into areas of Persia. And then the Persians take over, and that area becomes even bigger. It just kind of swells. So the Persian Empire is the one, the story of Esther takes place with Jews in the Persian Empire later on. Okay. All right. So I thought I would take just a few minutes. Today is the middle of a Jewish holiday, Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year. I want to talk a little bit about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which are holidays that are outlined in the Old Testament and their significance because they're happening now. Okay. So I just want to spend a few minutes. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are the bookends of the Jewish high holidays. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. The biblical name for this holiday is Yom Teruah. This year, Rosh Hashanah began at the evening, yesterday evening, September 25th, continues through the day, and ends the evening of Tuesday, September 27th, because hours are measured in the Jewish calendar from sundown to sun up. Okay. All right. Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, is the holiest day in Judaism. It occurs annually on the 10th of Tishrei, which is the 7th month of the Hebrew calendar. Okay. Alongside the related holidays of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is one of the two components of the high holy days of Judaism. This year, Yom Kippur will begin on the evening of Tuesday, October 4th, and ends on the evening of Wednesday, October 5th, 2022. So we're in the middle of these high holy days, okay? Yom Kippur completes the annual period known in Judaism as the High Holy Days, or Yamin Noraim, the days of awe. It begins with Rosh Hashanah, the new year. The 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur correspond to the last 10 days of the 40-day period Moses was on Mount Sinai, receiving the second set of tablets. Remember, he brings one down, and then he destroys them with the golden calf. Then he's sent back up and he's there for 40 days. And these 10 days are a reminder of the last 10 days that Moses was up on the mount. Remember, when Moses comes down, the experience has transformed him and purified him so much that his whole countenance, his whole being shines, and people are not able to look at him. So he has to wear a covering over his face in order for people to look at him, because he is so purified and they can't be in his presence. And there is symbolism in that covering of Moses and the covering of the sisters' faces in the temple. Okay? Sisters are declared pure in the temple. The brethren are declared contingently pure based on their faithfulness. But sisters, you're pure. Okay? According to Jewish tradition, God inscribes each person's fate for the coming year into a book, the book of life, on Rosh Hashanah, and waits until Yom Kippur to seal the verdict. So there really are three books: the book of life, the book of damnation, and kind of the middle book. Okay? At the end of these 10 days, you have an opportunity to make sure that your name is written in the book of life. During the days of awe, this 10-day period, a Jew tries to amend their behavior and seek forgiveness for wrongs done against God, which are ben Adam lamokam, and against other human beings, ben Adam letovaro. Okay, so if you think about the 10 commandments, okay, some are related directly to God, and others are related to your relationship to people. Similarly, in the law of Moses, there are sacrifices that are made to reconcile yourself to God, and sacrifices that are made, animal sacrifices that represent reconciling yourself to others around you. Both of these kinds of reconciliations are important during these 10 days. The evening and the day of Yom Kippur are set aside for public and private petitions and confessions of guilt. At the end of Yom Kippur, one hopes that they have been forgiven by God. Okay? So it's an annual day of atonement, and it's a day of atonement for the whole nation. Remember when we talked in Psalms that some of the Psalms are prayers of thanksgiving for individuals, and some of them are for the nation, and some of them are prayers of or songs of mourning for individuals like David's. Some are songs of mourning for the entire nation. Okay. So a little bit about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah marks the beginning of the civil year, or the new year, according to the teachings of Judaism, and is the traditional anniversary of the creation of Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, and thus the initiation of humanity's role in God's creation. Okay. Rosh Hashanah customs include sounding the shofar, or the ram's horn, as prescribed in the Torah. This is a traditional prayer shawl. This is not a hat, it's a phylactery, and this is a phylactery. Okay, this is where observant Jews who are told to keep the word of God between their eyes and in their hands, they literally printed out the word of God and wore them in these little boxes on their heads and on their hands, particularly when they do formal prayer. And these are the phylacteries that continue on. When Christ talks about sometimes people being hypocritical, the Pharisees, that they enlarge their phylacteries. They make them bigger than they need to be so they can show off, my righteousness, my prayers are bigger and better than yours. Okay. So they sound the shofar, the ram's horn, following the prescription of the Hebrew Bible to raise a noise on Yom Teruah, which is the formal name of the new year. And they eat symbolic foods such as apples dipped in honey to sort of evoke the notion of a sweet new year. This is important. The Day of Atonement, Leviticus, in the book of Leviticus, where the law is laid out, 1629 mandates the establishment of this holy day. It's called a Sabbath. Okay, all holy days are called Sabbaths. There's a weekly Sabbath, okay, and then there are other holy days that are Sabbaths. And here's where we run into a little bit of trouble. In the New Testament, because I have a feeling that the truth is, we think that there's a missing Wednesday in the last week of Christ's life. But the issue is really that there are two Sabbaths that are observed in that week. There are two holidays. There's a weekly Sabbath plus a Sabbath or a holiday that is Passover, okay? And we just don't relate to that. We're so used to thinking of Sabbath being one day of the week, but all of these holidays are called Sabbaths. The 10th day of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement for Sins. It is called the Sabbath of Sabbaths, the holiday of holidays, and a day upon which one must afflict one's soul. So you're going to do some introspection. Leviticus 3:23-27 decrees that Yom Kippur is a strict day of rest. Okay, you don't do regular work. So there are 5 additional prohibitions that are traditionally observed. No eating or drinking. It's a day of fasting from sunup to sundown. Okay, that's the traditional fast. So once the sun goes down, you can eat. Once the sun comes up, the fast begins. You don't wear leather shoes. You don't bathe and you don't wash. Okay, you don't anoint oneself with perfumes or lotions. You just are who you are. And there are no marital relations during this time. Okay, those are proscribed. Those are prohibited. When the children of Israel gather at the base of Mount Sinai to send Moses up, this number 5 was also a prescription. They were not to have marital relations in that period before Moses goes up the mountain. And I think the reason for that probably has to do with those kinds of relations. It's like blood and death and certain, especially blood, but certain bodily fluids are associated with our human existence, not our eternal nature. Okay, so the notion that you have to take a ritual cleansing for women after menstruation is to remind you that that is not part of that. Menstruation and things like that are not part of your eternal nature. They're just a temporary thing here on earth. So we cleanse ourselves of those and move forward. On the Day of Atonement, when the temple at Jerusalem was standing, from the time that it was built in the Old Testament days through 70 AD, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest of the Aaronic priesthood, was mandated by the law, the Torah, to perform a complex set of special services and sacrifices for Yom Kippur to obtain divine atonement. The word Kippur means to atone in Hebrew for the whole nation. These services were considered to be the most important parts of Yom Kippur because through them the high priest made atonement for all Jews and the entire world. Jews meaning at this time the entire house of Israel. Okay. During the service, the high priest entered the Holy of Holies in the center of the temple, the holiest place in the temple. That was the only time during the year that anyone entered the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was. Doing so required special purification and preparation, including 5 immersions in a mikveh, or a ritual bath. Okay, baptism originated as a mikveh, okay, a ritual bath, and 4 changes, complete changes of clothing. Okay, so here is a kind of side view of the Temple of Solomon. Okay, there's the outer court where the sacrifices are made. There's where the daily sacrifice is made. There's eternal smoke and sweet savor going up all day and all night here from the sacrifices that are the animal sacrifices that are made here. And then they are boiled in their own fat. So it smells like a delicious chewies around the temple all the time. Okay. So this then is the holy place. Okay. There's where the candles are, the candlesticks are. They're actually oil lamps to represent the 12 tribes. On this side, you don't see it very well, but there's a table that has the showbread for each of the 12 tribes. Here is the altar of incense that's before the curtain that stands before the Holy of Holies. And on the inside of the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant. Only one person every year was allowed to go in, the high priest. So when we read about not Zedekiah, who is John the Baptist's father? It is
Zechariah.
Zechariah. Yes, when we read about Zechariah, he's not going in here. He's just going into here to perform his duties, okay? So Zechariah only goes into the holy place, all right? So another thing, this is the last thing that we'll talk about. Another thing that is a kind of an important part of this Day of Atonement is the scapegoat, okay? Once a year on Yom Kippur, the high priest sacrificed a bull as a sin offering to atone for any personal sins that he might have committed unintentionally through the year. So there are sacrifices that you make for sins that you do intentionally and some that are unintentional. You know, sometimes we make mistakes that hurt other people. You know what I mean? And so we make sacrifices through those. Subsequently, he took 2 goats and presented them at the door of the tabernacle. So the temple, think of the temple as just a permanent tabernacle. He presented them at the door here, okay? Because this started before the temple, right? One was to be for Yahweh, which is the name that the Jews use for God, okay? We translate this in our scriptures to Jehovah, which was offered as a blood sacrifice, which is another kind of sacrifice, and the other to be the scapegoat, to be sent away into the wilderness and pushed down a steep ravine where it dies. It's pushed off a cliff where it dies. The blood of the slain goat, which was the blood sacrifice, was taken into the Holy of Holies by the high priest of the Aaronic priesthood, behind that sacred veil, and sprinkled on the mercy seat, which is the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. And it is where the presence of the Lord is in the temple. So, for example, when you go to, if you've ever been to the tabernacle display that we did, that's done up by Brother Matson's property, okay? They usually put a light up into the sky that represents the presence of the Lord. When the children of Israel were going through the wilderness, they were led by a cloud by day and a pillar of light by night. Our shadow, I mean our cloud, we sing about our shadow by day and our pillar by night. That's in reference to this. So the goat that was sacrificed, its blood was put on the mercy seat to cleanse it and make it pure. Later on in the ceremonies of the day, the high priest confessed the intentional sins of the Israelites to God and places them, he literally puts his hand on the head of the goat, lays hands on his head, the head of the goat, and kind of imbues the goat with those sins. The scapegoat is called the Azazel, and who would symbolically take them away. They take them outside of the camp, outside of Israel, outside of the city, and is killed so that the sins go away. That's how they are taken away symbolically. And that's why today we have the word scapegoat, but it was part of a religious practice that's outlined in the Old Testament, okay? So we're in the middle of these high holy days. So the Jews around you will be using this week for reflection and to repent, okay? Just thought it would be good to know. And these things are all laid out in the Old Testament, okay? They're not just made up, they're laid out typically in the book of Leviticus, okay? And then this is not really the Ark of the Covenant. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know what it exists, but it's a kind of a rendering of what it looks like. It's made of special wood that's covered in gold. There are 2 cherubim facing each other, and their wings they cover their faces with their wings. And this top part here, this lid, is called the mercy seat, okay? It's the place where God is likely to come when he comes to his temple. We have that same notion in our temples as well, right? Our temples are, if the Lord comes, he will come quickly to his temple, right? So that's kind of our lesson for today. It's just an overview, but does anybody have any with questions, or I should have stopped in the middle. Questions or concerns or things like in your reading that you've read and you're like, I don't understand what this means. I might be able to help. If not, I can take a note and see if I can find out. Steve, you had something. Go ahead and unmute. You're mute, Steve, so you can unmute. Brother Vance, you are muted, so if you can unmute, then you can just talk. Do you see where you can? It should look like your oh, and there's a chat thing too. Okay.
Brother Vance, if you have your computer, just push your space bar.
Oh yes, yeah. The Millennial Messiah is a great, great. I by accident, through no fault of my own, I think on my first year back from my mission, actually took an Old Testament class from. Oh, he was a member and was reinstated as a member. He does, he's Jewish and he does another, Isaiah Explained, okay? That he is a member of the church who kind of tries to explain Isaiah from a Jewish perspective. Here's an interesting thing that he taught us, is that modern day America, the United States, can be compared to Egypt in Isaiah's day, because Egypt was a place where people escaped to escape oppression. So some of the people who stayed in Jerusalem escaped to Egypt and then were restored from there. It's similarly, the Savior, when after his birth, Mary and Joseph escaped to Egypt during the time that King Herod is killing the people, right? So America can be compared to that, because after World War II, the United States, before World War II, the center of Jewish, the Jewish population was like in Poland, in Eastern Europe. After the Holocaust and before Israel, the United States, especially the state of New York, was the center of the most Jews after the dispersion. So the United States acts like Egypt, and a place to go and be before you, in order to be restored. Similarly, this continent is a place of refuge for the remnant of the Lehites, okay? That remnant that's at the end of the Book of Mormon, those are the children of Israel. We are not the remnant. We are not. We are Gentiles in the Book of Mormon. Always, 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 always. Okay? And though we can obtain some of those blessings through our patriarchal blessing, the remnant is the remnant of the Lamanites. It's going to come to a knowledge of the truth, and then the temple is rebuilt. Okay? So that happens again. So it's sometimes, that was something that stuck with me, is that the United States, or this country, serves in the role of Egypt at the time, in modern day times. All right, is there any other questions? Brother Davis, thank you for your message. Brother and Sister Bonnie, any questions?
Thank you so much, John. That was super interesting. Thank you. It's good to see you.
I hope it's helpful. I don't want to, like, if you're the gospel doctrine teacher, I don't want to.
I don't know how you know all this. It's like very fascinating though.
Well, I think for me, it helps that I have a Jewish sister.
That's, yeah.
And a brother-in-law. And for me, it helps to sort of set the stage to understand what the Old Testament is about, you know? Kind of for the people that it was meant for. You know what I mean? So, and a lot of it is around, it's just sometimes putting it together that's difficult because of the way that we study. We don't study very much of this in context. The Old Testament, we just skip around in and pick our favorite stories.
Yeah, and Isaiah isn't one I read much, so thank you.
And it's hard. Isaiah
Thank you.
is hard. And the church sort of
Yeah.
is, well, if you have the spirit of prophecy, you'll understand it. Ready, go. Thanks. You know what I mean? And so I always felt like, I just don't have the spirit of prophecy because it makes no sense to me. And
Yeah.
I think it's good to put in work because then you can start to put pieces together. And maybe by that, you will be able to obtain the spirit of prophecy. You know what I mean? It's hard to obtain it without any context. So anyhow, what we're reading for the next 2 weeks, this is beginning today. And then the week that begins conference week is Isaiah 50 through the end of Isaiah. Okay. And then we start Jeremiah after that. And we start with a whole new prophet. A whole new prophet. But you'll see some similarities. Their missions are a lot similar. And you'll see some, I think not necessarily Jeremiah, but when we get to Ezekiel, we see Ezekiel called like Isaiah was. And you'll see some parallels between like Moses and Isaiah and Ezekiel and even Lehi and Joseph Smith. You'll see some common things that happen there. Okay. All right. So if there aren't any questions, then I'll just go ahead and stop this sharing and say thank you for attending. And and I'll just say goodbye, and Brother Lee can turn off the recording.